In 1983, the U.S. Department of Defense announced a tender to develop vehicles specifically designed for transporting soldiers and military equipment capable of enduring desert conditions and rough terrains. It's almost as if they knew a war was on the horizon and were preparing for it. I mean, this was nearly 7 years before the Gulf War. Coincidence? Anyway, several companies submitted bids, but in the end the contract went to AM General, securing a deal worth $1.2 billion at the time to develop 55,000 vehicles, later named the Humvee. Just a few years later, the vehicle was put to use during the invasion of Panama and the Gulf War. The Humvee gained widespread fame and popularity, appearing on TV with American soldiers riding in it. It became a symbol of pride for the U.S. military industry and a representation of American power. AM General wanted to capitalize on the buzz surrounding the Humvee's success, fueled by the euphoria of victory in war and the public's admiration for the vehicle, and sell it to civilians. However, the idea seemed to be brushed aside and never pursued. But there was one person who fell in love with the Humvee and decided he had to have it: Arnold Schwarzenegger, the Terminator. He was at the peak of his fame, one of Hollywood's top stars, and his movies were breaking box office records. That raw power and action-packed lifestyle made him feel like the Humvee was the perfect match for his persona at the time. So, he actually approached AM General to buy a vehicle from them, and surprisingly, the company refused. Not one to back down, Arnold went back to them and insisted on his request. Again, the company turned him down, explaining that the vehicle was not authorized for civilian use and did not have a license for public roads. Arnold, apparently apathetic to these legal matters and technical terms, had a bold suggestion: make a civilian version of the Humvee. The company thought about it and realized that the media attention surrounding their interactions with Arnold could provide just the marketing boost they needed to make this idea a success. And sure enough, in less than a year, they rolled out a civilian version of the Humvee and called it the Hummer. Naturally, the first person to get one was Arnold. The Hummer was unlike anything people had seen on the streets. Big, bold, and out of the ordinary. Celebrities raced to get their hands on it and show it off, which only boosted its popularity. It became a beloved vehicle, not just for adventure and off-road enthusiasts, but for everyday Americans too. A massive, powerful vehicle that could handle any terrain or condition, the Hummer symbolized the dominant sentiment in America at the time. A feeling of American strength and global dominance, especially following the collapse of the Soviet Union. And as for the price, it wasn't for everyone. It cost around $50,000 at the time. While its fuel consumption was extremely high, this wasn't a big issue since fuel prices were relatively low. However, the main problem was that the Hummer's gas-guzzling nature soon put it at odds with environmental advocates, who launched significant awareness campaigns against it. At first, these campaigns didn't make much of a dent in its popularity. But, dear subscriber, keep in mind, those very campaigns would eventually seal the Hummer's fate. The Hummer brand was on a steady rise, gaining global popularity and earning a place in people's hearts from 1992 to 1999, until General Motors acquired the trademark from AM General. Then, in 2002, the H2 model appeared, smaller than the original H1. Some third-party companies even modified the H2, turning it into a limousine. Then, in 2005, the H3 model appeared, and it was the smallest of them all. By the way, an even smaller model appeared in 2008, the HX, a two-door version with a convertible roof. This model, however, didn't achieve great success. You might be wondering, why did they keep downsizing the Hummer with each new model? Well, to answer your question, my dear subscriber, as we mentioned earlier, the Hummer was a reflection of the prevailing situation in America and the state of Americans. From 2000 onwards, things began to change. Fuel prices started climbing, and the American economy was no longer as strong as it had been in the booming 1990s. On top of that, major events shook the nation: the 9/11 attacks, the invasions of Afghanistan and Iraq, and Americans saw Humvees burning on their TV screens during these wars. These factors made many people grow to resent the Hummer, as it reminded them of those grim images. At the same time, environmental awareness campaigns gained traction. convincing more and more people to care about the planet. This led some extreme environmental activists to take drastic measures, attacking Hummer showrooms and setting many of the vehicles on fire. And then, my dear subscriber, came the event that completely wiped out the Hummer, the 2008 financial crisis. Who, in the middle of a global economic meltdown, would even consider buying an expensive gas-guzzling vehicle? Sales began to collapse, and the Hummer received no support from its parent company, General Motors, which was struggling with the crisis itself and preparing to declare bankruptcy. General Motors eventually decided to let go of the Hummer brand and planned to sell it to a Chinese company. However, the deal was canceled after the Chinese government intervened to block it. Why? China had long been accused of being a global environmental villain due to the massive pollution from its industries. At the time, the country had started taking steps to improve its international image regarding the environment and climate. Buying a brand synonymous with environmental harm, like the Hummer, would have only added to its problems. You might ask, but can the Chinese government really stop investors in the country from making deals? The answer is obvious, my dear subscriber. Of course they can. I can't believe you even asked that question. It's communist China, my comrade. To be fair, some sources claim the Chinese company couldn't convince Chinese banks to finance the deal, which is why it fell apart. Personally, though, I don't buy that explanation at all. Later on, General Motors was rescued through a government-backed restructuring plan, allowing it to stay afloat in the market. However, even as the company began recovering, it couldn't find any buyers for the Hummer brand. As a result, GM decided to shut it down indefinitely in mid-2010. Things stayed quiet until 2019. It's worth noting that, back in 2015, the US Army had already moved on, commissioning Oshkosh Corporation to develop a replacement for the Humvee. By 2019, rumors started circulating that GM was considering reviving the Hummer brand, but the comeback was delayed due to a strike involving around 50,000 GM workers. Then, not long after, the COVID-19 pandemic struck, pushing plans even further back. Finally, in 2020, GM officially announced the return of the Hummer, but this time as a sub-brand focused on electric vehicles, EVs, under its GMC division. To reintroduce Hummer to the public, GM aired a 30-second Super Bowl commercial featuring NBA superstar LeBron James. Now, the Super Bowl is a massive event in the US, watched by nearly the entire country. The cost of a single second of ad time during the game ranges from $150,000 to $250,000, and that figure climbs higher every year. An ad like that, during such a major event, is more than enough to revive an iconic brand in people's minds. The idea of a company reviving an old, discontinued brand, redeveloping it and reintroducing it to the market, is a smart move. It significantly cuts down on initial marketing costs compared to launching a completely new brand. Reviving nostalgia and rekindling memories of older brands isn't unique to General Motors. Other companies have done the same. Ford brought back the Bronco, Jeep revived the Gladiator, Toyota reintroduced the Supra, and more companies are likely to follow suit, with plans to develop electric versions of these classics, as EVs are the current trend. Since then, several environmentally friendly models of the GMC Hummer EV have been released, aligning with today's green priorities. Interestingly, Arnold Schwarzenegger, the same man who pushed for the Hummer's first civilian model, has long since transformed into a passionate advocate for environmental protection and climate change awareness. That's a wrap for today's video. This was Nova from the Nova Briefcase channel. If you enjoyed the episode, please support me by hitting that like button, subscribing, and sharing your thoughts in the comments. I'd love to hear your feedback. And don't forget to check out more videos on the channel. There's plenty of great content for you to explore. Catch you in the next one. Goodbye.